This is the new Sirui Jupiter 100mm macro cinema lens on EF mount with an amazing 1.5x macro ratio, meaning you can get really up close and personal with your subject or product. This video will be a review of this awesome lens, as well as a look into just how useful a macro lens like this can be for videographers. So first of all, let me introduce you to this Sirui Jupiter 100mm macro lens. This is a cinema lens, which means it has no autofocus. It is a fully manual lens, but it does have a really smooth 200-degree focus ring, which allows you to have really precise focusing, which is very important for getting pinpoint focus on a really close-up shot in a macro scenario, for example. Sirui have sent me the EF mount version of this lens here, which is really useful for me to adapt it to my Canon RF cameras, whether that be something like the full frame R5 or using the speed booster on something like the C70. I use this Sirui EF to RF adapter with these Jupiter lenses as a cheap adapter to get them on my R6 Mark II or Canon R5, but the lens also comes in a very versatile PL mount, which means it can adapt to pretty much any camera system. This lens is really well built and is of a solid metal construction, weighing in at 803 grams, which isn't bad at all considering the size and build of this lens. This lens has a maximum aperture of T2.8 and it comes with a declicked smooth aperture ring all the way from T2.8 down to T22 for seamless adjustment in aperture. So first impressions of the build of the lens is really good, but let's put it to use. First of all, you don't have to use a lens like this exclusively for macro work, as 100mm is a really useful and flattering focal length for shooting people and headshots, for example. So it's really useful in scenarios like interviews or talking head stuff like this. Sirui also sent me the 50mm Jupiter version of this lens to compare the two focal lengths. Now both of these lenses do have a really nice look, and you can see just how sharp they are right off the bat, and they render a really pleasing image. But personally, for a talking headshot like this, I really like the flattering rendering of the 100mm Jupiter lens in this scenario, but let me know which one you prefer down below. I also love in these shots how the 100mm focal length brings that background closer in the image compared to the 50mm thanks to that longer working distance. So I wanted to put together a quick video to show how useful and versatile this focal length can be for video, so I made an almost like jewelry advert sequence where I'm focusing not just on the model and the subject, but on the individual items of jewelry too. And I love how that 1.5x magnification ratio can really punch in on the jewelry. It gets in really close and shows the details of products. So obviously this is really great for product videos where you might have a person holding an item or wearing a product like here. Now focusing can be a bit of a challenge at this focal length, especially when you're at this close of a focus distance, as the depth of field is just so thin. Now a 100mm macro lens like this works great on its own, of course, but for me I think it's great working in tandem with a more standard field of view lens like the 50mm Jupiter cinema lens here. Out in the field, I loved using the 50mm for my more standard shots and establishing shots, and the 100mm to add in flashes of small details. This can really make your videos look so professional, like in these mock luxury watch adverts I put together using these two lenses. I used a Jupiter 100mm lens to add in those flashes of details, particularly from the dials of the watches that you just wouldn't be able to achieve with any other lens without this kind of macro functionality. So another reason I love a macro lens like this is the ability to bring attention to smaller details in a scene as a kind of storytelling technique where other lenses just can't get as close. The Sirui Jupiter 50mm lens alongside the 100mm macro make for a great team for these narrative style sequences, where I am using the 50mm lens for the wider establishing shots of the scene again. But the 100mm macro lets you isolate details of the scene that may add to the story or the narrative. Like these texts in this scene, for example, where this lens gets you so close and is so sharp that you can read the text right off the phone really easily, and you can get this comfortably on this lens. And here's a shot of the eye, again so close and so sharp that you can see the reflection of the phone in the eye. Or maybe you want to show that the character is nervous by showing some nervous, fidgety hands, or something like a wedding ring, for example. Here's another example of using the 100mm macro lens to show in this scene what a character is writing. It is so sharp and clean, and it gets you close enough to read exactly what is being written. And to be honest, you can get even closer still, just like here. Here's a final example using the Jupiter 100mm lens to punch in on the lips as the character applies makeup. So mixing in a macro lens like this into narrative work can make for a really dynamic sequence. And it's just so fun looking around the scene and coming up with ideas for things that you can really hone in on and show details to the audience. So in the narrative sense, a macro lens like this is really useful, but without a doubt my favorite way of using this Sirui Jupiter 100mm lens is for product videography. This is without a doubt my favorite lens I have ever used for product videography. Its ability to focus on tiny elements of small products and make them look huge is just so cool and useful. Particularly on things like jewelry and watches, this lens just excels and gives a really professional look to your videography. I'm a bit of a watch nerd, so it's been really fun using this lens to get up so close on my watches and look at little elements of the dial, for example. But if you are a professional, being able to offer product videography like this can really make your work stand out to potential clients, and having a lens like this in your arsenal is well worth it. So here's a quick look at a few examples of the differing magnification ratios between that Jupiter 50mm lens and the 100mm macro lens. In these examples, look just how much closer you can get with the 100mm lens thanks to that 1.5 times magnification ratio. Again, both lenses are useful in these scenes, but that 100mm lens just gets you so impossibly close that it adds something really unique to the sequences. This lens is super sharp and super clean too. With some macro lenses, you may lose a little bit of sharpness as you get to the minimum focus distance, but this lens stays super sharp and super clean too. Here I am at its minimum focus distance, step down to T2.8, and the details are just so crisp. And it's not just sharpness but lack of chromatic aberrations, which is pretty much completely absent on this lens, I found, even from wide open. And staying on the subject of sharpness, I have been really impressed with this 100mm lens in terms of its image quality throughout. Here's an example shot on my Canon R6 Mark II, shot wide open at T2.8, and you can see just how sharp this lens is. And here is a comparison with the RF 70-200 2.8 at 100mm, and as you can see, very comparable results, and the Jupiter may even have a slightly sharper image than the very expensive RF lens. Again, when focusing on small details, there is barely any sign of longitudinal chromatic aberrations either, which is very important for a macro lens like this and contributes to the really clean rendering that this lens puts out. So in terms of price, this lens is currently selling for £1,189 on Sirui's website. So it is quite an investment, but well worth it, particularly if you do shoot product videography. And Sirui right now, I believe, have a Black Friday sale on, so it's definitely worth checking out their website to see if you can get this Jupiter lens any cheaper right now if you are interested in picking it up. So that's my review of this Jupiter 100mm lens, and I've not only been really impressed with its image quality, but it has definitely been one of the most fun lenses I have used in a while now. I also love that it is on the EF mount rather than RF mount because I can adapt it to my R5 and R6 Mark II. but I've also had a lot of fun using it on my Canon C72. And this lens actually inspired me to start a channel reviewing watches because I just had so much fun using this lens for product videography. I think in the future I'll probably compare this Jupiter lens to the RF 100mm macro lens to see how they match up against each other. And although I have focused mainly on the 100mm Jupiter lens, the 50mm version I found to be really good too. It's a faster lens at T2 also, so if you're looking for a standard field of view cinema lens with a nice shallow depth of field, then definitely check out this lens too. A huge thanks as always to Sirui for sending these lenses out to me to try. And if you are interested in picking up either of these lenses or maybe one of the many other Jupiter lenses, as I believe they also do a 75mm lens and a 35mm lens in this range, head on over to Sirui's website and make sure at checkout if you enter the code James, you will get a 5% off any purchase on Sirui's website. So let me know down in the comments what you think of this Sirui Jupiter lens, and if you have a macro lens in your kit for videography, I would be really interested to know. Thanks as always for watching. Big thank you to Sirui, and I will see you all in the next one.